So late August of last year, a new phrase was laid out in the open air that I didn't think I had ever heard. And if I did, I did not pay too much attention to. The Republican convention must have had it as a planned talking point. Numerous speakers railed against cancel culture and how it was ruining our country. A resolution at that convention was later passed that said cancel culture was responsible for erasing history, encouraging lawlessness, and violating free speech. Now, I was not exactly sure what the phrase meant, but I figured it must have something to do with rejecting progressive values. I determined whatever it was they were against, I must be for. Then Governor Andrew Cuomo was accused by numerous women of sexual harassment. A March 16th New York Times article had this headline: Cuomo says he won't bow to cancel culture. Now, even Cuomo was using that term, and that made me pretty angry. After reading through some articles and even a small book, I determined canceling is culturally blocking someone from public influence. Culturally blocking someone from public influence. The term actually has a history in Black culture as a rather misogynistically way to break up with your girlfriend. But the practice of canceling goes back much further. Ann Charity Hudley, a linguist and professor at University of California, Santa Barbara, who studies Black vernacular, described canceling as a survival skill as old as the Southern Black use of the boycott. Canceling is a way to acknowledge that you don't have to have the power to change structural inequality, Hudley said. You don't even have to have the power to change all of public sentiment, but as an individual, you can still have power beyond measure. I think this power beyond measure is what scares some. Now, in the past, people might boycott a company or a country, but today, canceling is essentially boycotting a public person. Now, on social media, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, etc., has changed everything. It has never been easier to cancel someone or to publicly shame someone. Critics of cancel culture call it mob mentality, but canceling at its essence will not tolerate abuse and harm any longer. Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, you got canceled. But canceling someone rarely wins. For every Bill Cosby, there are many Donald Trumps who get away with abusive behavior and language. Sometimes it even backfires and the person you're trying to cancel gets more notoriety. Canceling is often the tool of the powerless, the survivors who have no other options, and a strategy for justice movements. But conservatives cancel as well. Republicans right now are canceling those in their own party who don't bow to Trump. They are trying to cancel Liz Cheney and replace her leadership with our very own lie-spreading Congresswoman, Elise Stefanik. Colin Kaepernick, the former professional football player who simply took a knee during the national anthem to protest racial violence, was effectively canceled by conservatives. Republicans want to cancel culture, except for when it fits into their narrow moral framework. Now, anybody remember from the 1990s that term politically correct? Still used today, but it became sort of popular in the 1990s. Conservatives thought political correctness was ruining our country. Conservatives now are using cancel culture similarly. to divert attention away from discrimination and to uphold the status quo. Conservatives, by definition, want to keep things the way they are. They want to conserve. They don't want to change language and morality and systems of inequality. When the right says we reject cancel culture, what they are saying is we don't want progressive, identity-driven politics, your women's rights, your openness to trans people, your morality, and your redefinition of timeless words. Now, the words that we use, I think, are very important. When a group of people says, we do not want to be called that, and you do it anyway, that is either ignorance or just plain meanness. And that old adage, sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will never hurt me, that's wrong. Words do hurt. A bone will heal in a matter of weeks. Words take months of therapy and years of depression to heal. But words are just the tip of the iceberg. There is a bunch of discrimination under the surface of words. So we also need to focus on discriminatory laws and policies. The conservative backlash against cancel culture means that the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, and trans rights have been winning. The meaning of racism is moving away from an individual bias to instead meaning a system of structure that benefits white people, and that there are multiple ways to express gender, not just two, that patriarchy and sexual harassment will not be tolerated, are gaining mainstream appeal. Now, this has not only riled up conservatives, but many progressives as well, especially some older ones and more established who have not learned the new lingo and maybe are not aware of their own power and privilege. Now, I have been talking mostly about high-level politics and US culture, but in everyday life, if we don't take our words and actions seriously, we can harm people. We may aim at creating the beloved space of community, but our language can easily disrupt that. Often when someone says something hurtful, we freeze and don't know what to say. But I think we do have the moral obligation as Unitarian Universalists to not only use kind words and inclusive language, but to disrupt harm when we see it happen. However, the way we disrupt, and by we, I mean me, can have an air of righteousness about it. The vocabulary of the saved and woke. In our attempts to be right and good and correct, we can actually cause more harm. I remember 4.5 years ago, we had a public forum here at the church on how to make Canton more inclusive. And there was a panel, and on that panel was a woman of color who talked about the racial discrimination she faced at Price Chopper, a local grocery store. And then a white person in the audience spoke up about the poverty that white cashiers face, and in essence, canceled that woman's experience. I still think about that moment. I didn't say anything, and I also think about what I should have said, what I could have said. At the same time, as important it is to disrupt harmful actions and words, let's be honest. Being called out sucks. Have you ever been publicly called out? It feels horrible. I was recently called out in front of 40 of my other religious professionals in New York State. My behavior was called out as racist, which was a complete misunderstanding. I was put on the spot. I felt like I was no longer part of the group, that I was on the outside. I was embarrassed, and I was about to click leave meeting. But I had a conversation, a separate conversation with the person who called me out. We both apologized and we went back into the group and we talked about what we said to each other and we closed the loop. Now, my takeaway from that experience was that being called out sucks and that covenanted people really shouldn't be into canceling each other. And when and if we are called out, we should still stay in dialogue, apologize, move forward to heal together. I think the first step is really to call in. Now, this is a real situation that happened to me actually this week. I was on the phone with a relative and they said, what I don't get is that they kill each other all the time. And then when the police kill one of them, they start protesting. Now, in that moment, it's hard to describe, but there was this spark of rage, this kind of lightning through my body. I am no Buddha, and it angered me a lot. And I wanted to say, that's racist. But I took a deep breath and said, what do you mean by they? The blacks was the response. Well, I said, I disagree with you. What black, white, and other races are protesting against is when police officers shoot an unarmed person who don't pose a threat. Oh, I see what you mean, they said. Now, this led to a richer conversation about racism, guns, and poverty. I think this was more of a calling in. I said my piece with peace. Calling in should be the default. Yes, it takes more time, more compassion, more energy, and more patience than calling out. And if you are thinking of calling out, I invite you to first do an analysis of power. Like if you are facilitating a group, you shouldn't be the one calling out. If you're a manager, don't call out one of your employees. Be aware of your own identities and your own place in society. And by using an analysis of power, I think the women who went public about Governor Cuomo's sexual harassment were justified in doing so. They were the victims, survivors with obviously less power. And they wanted to prevent future harm. It is not like they could pull him aside and talk to him. Who knows how Cuomo would have taken that. A few years ago, at a minister's gathering, a sermon was preached by a friend of mine, and some of the language in it made light of mental illness. Now, in that moment, I was like, ooh, that did not land well. That was a bad choice of words. I'll have to talk to her privately about that. But you could sense there was this collective rage in the room. And after the service, there was a closed door meeting, and a few people got to talk with the person who preached that sermon. And what I can tell you, what I learned is it takes authentic self-worth and compassion to sincerely apologize. It also takes authentic self-worth to forgive. And that's what happened. So in Unitarian Universalism, in our congregations, in our organizing for justice, there is bound to be conflict, bound to be messy things that happen. Nobody has this stuff down perfectly. Calling in has to be the preferred way. And if we are critiqued and called in, we should have the decency to take it very seriously. Canceling has a long history of being a brilliant strategy that brings collective pressure on corporations, institutions, and individual abusers. But calling out and canceling can also become vengeful and punitive. Many are frightened by this newfound power of the powerless, and many more are now more careful about what they say and do. But I do fear if we are too punitive with calling out and canceling, we might be afraid to have deeper conversations. I also think that the more dog whistle cultural war stuff that is out there, the more conservatives win, because it distracts progressives from changing the unfair and inequitable policies, laws, and practices. But if we are not careful with how we call people in, we could be alienating people who would join in our liberation movements. We have the duty to reject things in our culture that are immoral, unethical, and harmful. And we can do this in a relational way. We can call in with compassion, forgive like Buddha, and have faith that harm can be repaired. We need to again believe that people can be transformed. The way we are in community with each other can transform us and the world. Amen, and blessed be.